Hey yo Space Bees, I'm Rakku and welcome to a YouTube video. It seems like it's been quite some time since I've done a more long form video specifically for YouTube. But this is a topic I've talked a little bit about on stream, and I figured it'd be fun to put these thoughts into actual video format here as part of the discussion. So if you spent any amount of time on the internet or seeing what's been getting a lot of attention lately, you might have heard of the indie animation show that's currently airing on Amazon Prime, Hazbin Hotel. This project is the work of Vivian Medrano, who started on YouTube with a pilot for this show several years ago now. And since then, she's also created a sister series called Hell of a Boss, which maybe we'll get to in a future video. But Hazbin Hotel was in development for quite a while, and recently, in the last month or so, its first season aired on Amazon Prime. And if you have Prime, you can just watch episodes 1 through 8 for free over there. And just a little bit of background for me, I wasn't following the development of Hazbin Hotel too much. I watched Hell of a Boss first, and then I went back and watched the pilot for Hazbin, and I liked what I saw, but I didn't really engage with the community at all. It was one of those things where I watched it and said, I'll just make a note for when the finished full product comes out, I'll take a look. And I watched the entirety of season 1, and it was great. It's a really interesting show. And for background for folks who might not have heard of Hazbin Hotel, it's an adult animated musical series about demons and hell. And it's very well crafted. There's interesting lore and world building. The voice cast and characters are phenomenal. And that leads us to the whole point of this video that we're going to be looking at today. What I've pulled up here is a tier list from goodoldtiermaker.com. And it has been some time since I've done one of these, either in content or in standalone videos. But we're going to jump into rating the cast of characters, the core cast of characters in Hazbin Hotel. And this one comes to us courtesy of Hay Fevers on Twitter. So credits to them for creating this tier list. I looked around a bit on the site, and this was the one I found that had a pretty comprehensive collection of the main cast. So this isn't side characters or minor background characters, rather. These are all characters that have had some sort of key role in the series up till now in season 1. And originally this was based on letters, your typical A or S through D tiers normally. But I wanted to take a little bit of a different approach when it came to this particular tier list, because I think the cast of characters in Hazbin Hotel and Hell of a Boss are very well written and very developed and nuanced. So it wouldn't really contribute much to just rate the quality of the characters, because I like all of them quite a bit. Instead, I am going to be rating these based on my personal connection to the characters after watching how they've engaged with each other and the story in season 1. So rather than just, do I think the character is good or not, this is going to be how I feel personally connected to the characters this far in the story. And then after season 2 airs in a year or whenever, we may have to revisit this again and see how things have changed. But the way I've broken it out here at the top, the highest level that we have here, Ride or Die. These are characters that I feel a deep connection with, that I definitely would stand by or be willing to fight for, hands down. The next tier is Protect at all cost, characters that I think I have a pretty good personal connection with, that I really value, and that I think maybe not Ride or Die level, but the next tier down of characters I'm invested in and would definitely be willing to stand by on a personal level. Next up, We're Super Cool, maybe a little bit less so, but characters that I respect, and I think I would have a lot to share common ground and sort of be on the same page with. So maybe one slightly less tier of proximity or intimacy down would be we're super cool. Next tier is friends. More of a kind of surface level connection with these characters. I think we'd be fine, but probably not super best friends. The level of connection might not be as strong here, but we're still on good terms. Next up, not entirely trustworthy. Kind of self-explanatory. This doesn't mean I think these characters are bad, but from a personal level, they're not someone I would directly trust. And as far as being able to interact closely, I would probably keep it arm's length just because I don't know their intentions or I don't trust their intentions. Next up, we can't be friends. This one also somewhat self-explanatory. This means, hey, I don't think I could get along with this person. I don't think we could be friends. Chances are I would avoid interactions with this character no matter what. Also kind of in this category, I think, would be characters that I don't feel any sort of connection to whatsoever. So if I did interact with them, I guess it would be probably couldn't be on friendly terms, or I just don't know enough about them. And last here, we have Valentino. I don't think this is really a surprise to anybody, but to start off, just to establish here, our Mothboy Overlord is sitting at his own tier at the very bottom. And as a disclaimer here, since I know the discourse can be a little bit muddy sometimes, I don't think Valentino's a bad character. I think he's a very well-written villain and a really fleshed out antagonistic force that you're meant to hate. And to echo what I've seen other creators say on the topic of hateable characters, if a character is written in a way where you legitimately and viscerally hate them, that doesn't mean they're a badly written character. Usually that means they're an effectively well-written character because it conveys what you are supposed to feel towards a person that is evil. And Valentino, as people who've seen the series know by now, is a terrible person. He's violent, aggressive, abusive, manipulative, and a whole bunch of things that are terrible. But it's all written into his character and the way he's portrayed, which is the point. You're supposed to hate him, and that means it's effective. And Joel Perez's portrayal of Valentino is phenomenal. He brings such a horrible character to life effectively. And I just think it's important to call that out when we say that we hate a character. It's not because they're poorly written. It's usually because they're well written and they do their job effectively. And because he's such a terrible person, Valentino gets his own tier at the very bottom. The rest of the stuff will be pretty subjective, and I'll try and explain where everything kind of falls as I rank stuff here. And like we've done on tier lists in the past, it's been quite a while. From the left to the right as tiers fill out, the highest ranking in each respective tier is going to be on the leftmost. And as things populate within that tier, the hierarchy goes less to the right. Should be self-explanatory. But let's go ahead and get started. There's not a ton of characters to go through, but I kind of have a lot to say regarding some of the core cast. So in addition to the ratings, I kind of want to explain my rationale a bit here. So first up, we have the protagonist and main character of Hazbin Hotel. We have Charlie Morningstar, daughter of Lucifer and Princess of Hell. Charlie is one of my favorite characters, and it's going to be tough to say that because I like the vast majority of the cast that has a core role in the story. She is a dreamer and an idealist and a little naive, but I think her intentions for what she's trying to do throughout the story are very admirable and noble, but she's got to figure out how to get there. And so Charlie is going up here on protect at all cost. I'm really interested to see what she kind of learns and how she grows as a character moving into the next season. But if I talk about personal connections, I feel like Charlie would be someone who would have my back. Next up, we'll move through these relatively fast so this video doesn't drag, but if I have things to say, I'll kind of stop and talk a little bit about it. Next up, we have Charlie's girlfriend, Vaggie. I'm going to put her one tier above Charlie on the protect at all costs tier. Let's make that protect at all costs. Vaggie is a character I kind of identify with and can relate to a little bit, more so than Charlie. And I think it's partly the protective nature that Vaggie shows off. Anyone who knows me in real life would probably see that when it comes to people I'm close to, I can be pretty protective of them in general, be they friends or family. If someone crosses them or does something to harm someone close to me, it can really activate that fight instinct to want to defend them and protect them from stuff. Between that and her level of conviction and devotion, it's something that, again, something I respect in a person. So I think we would be really cool too. So I'm going to rank Vaggie above Charlie, but they kind of function a bit like a duo in general, but I relate a bit more to her. So she's going up there on protect at all costs. Next up, we have one of the most popular characters in the series so far, for good reason, because he's very nuanced and very interesting. I'll try not to use that word too much and try and come up with good ways to describe what I think of these characters. But we've got Alistair, the radio demon himself. Alistair, from a character perspective, is, again, very well written and very complex. If we were rating this based on what I think of the quality of the characters, he'd probably be up here at the top. But we're talking about more of a personal connection and how I relate to the characters myself versus just how good I think they are. And so I'm putting Alistair on the not entirely trustworthy category. He's such a mysterious force in the show. We know he's very powerful. We know that he is put into this role helping Charlie with the hotel, but we don't really know why. We get hints that it's probably related to the deal that he's made. We don't know with who yet, but there's a lot of theories. And as a result, his motivations and reason for doing things is a bit mysterious. And I don't think personally that Alistair would be in looking out for my best interest if I knew him. Maybe if I was at the level of friendship with him, someone like Rosie, it'd be a bit different. But just as a regular person, I think he would be doing things behind the scenes I couldn't trust. So that's why he's going on not entirely trustworthy. We'll see as season 2 eventually plays out. Again, this tier list will probably change after the next season, so I might revisit this in the future if people find this discussion interesting. Next up, we have Angel Dust, our spider boy. Angel Dust is probably one of the most fleshed out characters if we talk about development arcs in season 1. And Angel Dust is awesome. He's one of my favorite characters because of not only his personality and his background and where he comes from, but because we see a lot of growth over the series. And he strikes me as the type who also looks out for people he's close to. It's not always easy because of the difficult situation he's put through, but his perseverance and his willingness to try and improve himself as a person is something I really respect. And I'm very curious to see where this guy's arc continues into the next season. But if you look at the starting point and the ending point and how Angel interacts with the people around him, it's definitely a lot of notable progression in the short, condensed 8-episode season of Hazbin. And so he's going up on Ride or Die. He's one of my favorite characters in the whole show. Probably not a real hot take. I know people love Angel, and everyone's really attached to that character. But on a personal level, I think we'd be pretty cool. And he'd definitely be someone that I'd want to have my back. Moving on, we have Husk, the surly bartender of the hotel. Husk is another character where it's been interesting watching his arc of progression and growth throughout the first season. From the pilot and early on when we see Husk, He is the grumpy bartender who's kind of seen it all and has a real cynical and pessimistic outlook on life. And we kind of don't get much other than that, besides he works for Alistair, and we'll find out later on in the season why. But I was sure that Husk was going to be just this background character who, you know, always has the quips and kind of bounces off of the more exuberant personalities, but would never really step into a critical role amongst the cast. He'd just kind of be the guy that's there and occasionally chime in, and maybe he had some sort of backstory that we'd hear about later. So I was really surprised in episode 4, where we got not only insight into what that backstory was about him being an overlord, but also we see his interactions with Angel, and instead of just being the grumpy bartender, Husk's role in the story becomes more of kind of like a mentor and a person that Angel can confide in specifically. And that is not something I expected. And so I'm going to put Husk up on Protect at All Cost. This character surprised me, but his role ended up being much more significant than I initially predicted. Between that and learning about his backstory and his ties to Alistair, I'm really curious to see what happens with him. So I like Husk as a character. He's someone that I feel like it might take a little bit of time to kind of get to know, but someone you could trust. If you really needed someone to confide in and be able to relate to, even though he's got his own baggage, I think his role in the story makes that pretty apparent. So yeah, character that surprised me, but I definitely like Husk a lot. Next up, we have Nifty. Nifty is another character that I thought would not really have a super key role in the story, and she's kind of a secondary character overall, but I thought we'd just never see her. We might see her pop in 1 or 2 scenes throughout the season, and then she would not be that significant. Turns out she is tied pretty closely to Alistair as well. How, we don't really know yet, but like Husk, she's in the service of the radio demon. But her zany, psychotic personality and overall chaotic gremlin energy is something that I thought would be annoying, especially the first couple times you see her. But it really kind of grew on me and balanced with the rest of the cast. And Nifty ended up being one of the most important characters in the very last episode of Season 1. And so, while I don't think I would be super close with her on a personal level, if we were cool, I think she'd be an interesting person to just have around, as long as I didn't feel like she was going to stab me. So we're putting Nifty on the Friends tier. I'm, like I said, interested to see what we learn about how she ended up in her situation. Because she's more than just the cleaning lady, the maid of the hotel. And I think there's more we just don't know yet, and it's probably related to Alistair. Next up, this one's kind of interesting because this is a secondary character that we don't have any plot interactions with from the rest of the cast, but is pretty integral to the overall story, and that's Kiki. The key and sort of like the embodiment of the hotel. And I'm going to put Kiki also on the Friends tier, mostly because we know that she's related to the creation of the hotel and Lucifer, but she's not a character that has any speaking lines or has really interacted from a story perspective. She's kind of like Charlie's pet. But her design is adorable, and I do think on a personal level she'd be just like every other fuzzy pet that you want to take care of. So we'll put Kiki on the Friends tier. Next up, we finally have some of the more villain classifications of characters. Again, I put Valentino down here out of order, but we have Adam, First Man, and pretty much the main antagonist or villain of Season 1. Adam is also a great character. He is over the top, misogynistic, arrogant, and overall not a good person, but he's a well-written, fleshed out villain that, again, kind of like Valentino, but not quite to the same extent. You love to hate, and he's so critical to the main story. On a personal level, not surprisingly, we couldn't be friends. I've known people like Adam in my life who've exhibited similar kind of personality traits, and they're the type of people that drive me away instantly. But when it comes to villains, again, he's a solid entry in the forces that stand against the main cast. And I'm curious to see if we ever see more of Adam after what happened in season 1. A lot of theories about what happens when the angels are killed. But he really kind of stole the show in a lot of ways and very memorable. But on a personal level, we couldn't be friends. People like Adam would immediately turn me off. Likewise, kind of for the same reasons, we have Lute, Adam's right hand. Lute, I think, again, very interesting and nuanced character in the way she's written. She's very loyal to Adam and very committed to the cause that he is carrying out with the extermination. But I don't think we know her entire story yet, especially with her interactions with Lilith at the end of season 1. And again, as a villain character, Lute's very hateable. We learn about her backstory and connection to Vaggie and how she conducts herself. She's kind of psychotic, but it makes sense that Adam would have someone like that as his right hand. So she's going underneath Dick Master on the We Can't Be Friends tier. We'll see how that sort of evolves in season 2. Depending on what she does, since she's in charge, with Adam being taken out, she could fall down to the Valentino tier. We don't know. Next up, we have a pair of side characters that show up kind of throughout, but aren't really critical to the story. We have Tom and Katie Killjoy. These are characters that Tom, for sure, I'm going to put in not entirely trustworthy. One, because I don't know much about him other than he's a newscaster, that he seems to not get along with his co-anchor Katie. But we don't really get much as far as the plot significance. So kind of like any other character, we just don't see enough to know about them personally. I have no real connection. And not entirely trustworthy isn't just characters I distrust, but it's also for ones that I just don't know enough about to have any sort of connection to. So we'll put Tom up here. And likewise, we'll put Katie one tier above him on the same level. Katie's a much more entertaining character, and the fact that she's voiced by the legend Brandon Rogers is even more hilarious. She's front and center every time she shows up in the few appearances she has throughout season 1. But I don't think I would go hang out with her. She seems like a pretty abrasive and aggressive person. I've seen people compare the characters knowing Brandon's body of work. People have compared Katie Killjoy to Bryce Tank Thrust, one of Brandon's characters and one of my favorites that he's portrayed. Not necessarily the same role as far as who they are in the story, but the disposition and personality is very on point. And he basically just channels Bryce energy into this character when he plays her, which is hilarious and really entertaining, but not really someone I could foresee myself being friends with or close to. We never know. We might learn more about either of these two later, and that's going to change where they fall on the list. Next up, we have Serpentius, our snaky boy. Serpentius is another character that surprised me. Kind of like Husk. I thought he was going to be a bit more of a throwaway character in the beginning. A random antagonistic force that might show up and get dealt with, and then you don't really see him for the rest of the series. Instead, he stuck around and ended up being a lot more connected to the main cast than I thought. And he ended up being one of the most plot significant characters near the end when we find out that redemption actually worked. But he's such a goofy dork, and he really tries his best, and he grew on me. I remember talking to some of my friends that have seen Hazbin, and I said that I didn't expect to be invested in any bit at all with Serpentius. But between his overall arc and his kind of goofy nature and how he's just trying so hard, especially when it comes to Cherry Bomb. I like Serpentius a lot. I think we'd be really good pals. I've also known people like him that always just try their hardest despite whatever disadvantages they may have. And I think we'd be cool. So we're putting Serpentius up on protect at all costs. I think he's going to be significant in the next season. But aside from those reasons, I think I'd personally get along quite well with him. Next up, we have the Egg Boys. The Egg Boys, again, as more secondary characters and support to Serpentius. I'm going to put them up here on the Friends tier. They are kind of goofy and not entirely trustable when it comes to confidential information, as we've seen in this season. But they seem loyal and willing to do what they need to do for people that they care about. So I would definitely be friends with the Egg Boys. Guess we'll see if the rest of them ended up in heaven later. Moving on, more of the quote-unquote villains of the story so far. We have the rest of the V's. First up is Vox, the TV demon. Vox is a very charismatic and well-designed character from both the aesthetics and overall motivations. I like Vox, but I don't think we could be friends. It's very obvious between him and the other V's that they're out to further their own agendas, and they don't care who they have to step on or step over in order to do that. And I get the feeling we're going to be seeing the V's come for power in season 2. So it'll be interesting to see how that happens, especially when Vox finds out that Alistair is back and didn't get taken out by Adam. So I'm putting him on the we can't be friends tier. I would not trust Vox at all. He seems like the person who would sell you out in a minute if it meant he was going to be able to grab power or further his own goals. Likewise, Velvet, the other member of the V's with Vox and Valentino, she's also going on we can't be friends tier, but I'm rating her higher than Vox because I think Velvet is the most dangerous of the V's. Her overall conduct and disposition, even though she's the smallest of them physically, tells me that she has a lot of power that she wields that's not visibly obvious. It's said from some of the theories I've read that she became such a powerful overlord because she introduced hell to social media. And so her control of social media and information as a quote-unquote influencer in hell makes her very powerful. And I think she's the one who has the most aggressive ambitions out of the 3. So when it comes to significance as characters and who I think would be more of a threat of the 3, it would definitely be Velvet. But I do like her a bit more from a personal perspective. Even though we couldn't be friends, I could kind of admire the brutal honesty of someone who's willing to do what it takes to get what they want. So that's why I'm rating her above Vox. I'm curious to see where things go with all 3 of the V's. And I think she is going to be one of the most significant players in the game and power dynamics of hell. Next up, we have Fat Nuggets. Fat Nuggets, I think, to me, draws a bit more kind of charm and appeal than Kiki. But we're going to put Angel's pet pig boy. I think Fat Nuggets is a boy. But we're going to put Fat Nuggets up here. 1 tier above Kiki on the Friends tier. I do like the overall design, and as far as pets go, Fat Nuggets is adorable. So we definitely would be friends with the Demon Pig. Moving on, make sure I don't skip any here. We have another overlord that fits in here. We have Zestial. This character we don't know much about. Zestial is sort of revered as, or feared and revered as, one of the oldest overlords in existence, based on little bits of backstory we get, and especially how he talks and behaves. You get the feeling that this guy's been around for eons, probably thousands of years, if not more. But I think he's the type of person who would respect someone that shows that they're worth it or has proven themselves and is especially respectful and loyal to him. So I think I could get along with Zestiel. We may find out that he's a completely ruthless person who no one can really stand alongside, but given his interactions with Carmilla, who's coming up next, I get the feeling that he's been around so long that he's a bit more chill, and as a result is a bit more methodical and has a level of respect for people he thinks earn it. So Zestiel's cool in my book. We'll see if that changes later, but we'd be friends. Next up, as I mentioned, we've got Carmilla Carmine, the arms dealer. Carmilla is a character that also surprised me because I think she might have been shown briefly in the pilot, but she didn't really have a main role in the story till season 1. And when she showed up in, is it 3 or 2? I think it's 3, in Scrambled Eggs, and we see her interactions with the other overlords, and we learn a bit more about her connection to the story. Again, I was expecting her to be kind of like this maybe tyrannical or maybe mob boss-ish type of character with not a lot of depth other than people are afraid of her, she's really strong. But then we learn about her role in the extermination with her killing one of the exorcists, and that she did it to protect her daughters. And so instead, we find out that Carmilla is a lot more of a protective mother type. And that becomes really important later on in the series when she ends up kind of mentoring Vaggie as well. But the type of person who, again, puts people around them above themselves in order to keep them safe, to look out for them, is something I really respect. So I think I would get along fine with Carmilla. We're super cool tier for her. Just based on the kind of vibe, again, I can be a bit of a protective person of those around me. And the fact that that's the reason why she had to do what she did is something that I could definitely identify with and respect. So I'm pretty sure we'd be cool. At some point after this, my plan is to also rank the songs in season 1, and Carmilla's are some of my favorite. Again, surprising. I didn't think she would be that prominent of a character, but I'll talk a bit about that when I eventually get around to rating the songs. Next up, we've got King of Hell himself, Charlie's dad, Lucifer. Lucifer is another character that surprised me. There have been a lot of speculation, I know, just based on what I've read from the fandom about who this guy was going to be in the story and what his role was going to be as Charlie's dad. Based on some of the other characters, fathers in the Vivzy Pop universe, between Hell of a Boss and Hazbin Hotel, there's been a bit of a shortage of good, in quotes, father figures. Lots of bad ones, but with the exceptions of characters like Stolas and Blitz to some extent in Hell of a Boss, I think a lot of people just assume Lucifer was going to be some kind of deadbeat, abusive, or malicious type of dad because he'd been out of the picture. Charlie mentions not seeing him hardly ever over the span of years. Also, giving us the lore drop that Lilith and Lucifer split up. So when we actually got to see Lucifer in episode 5, I believe it was, instead we find out that he's this depressed, anxious, kind of broken goofball of a character who doesn't really know how to connect with his daughter. So when she contacts him, he doesn't know how to handle it. And the majority of that episode is him trying to understand Charlie's motivation and basically come to terms with the fact that his daughter wants to do these big things, but because of his story and how he was cast down from heaven, he has a lot of reservations. But I think Lucifer is a really interesting character and a really different take on, again, the King of Hell. But I think he's the type of person I would definitely want to get along with and get to know. And he might be a bit of a bumbling buffoon at times, but you can tell he means well, which is something that I always try and look for in people I meet. Is, do they mean well regardless of their execution? If the intent is good, then I can definitely respect a person, as opposed to the opposite, where someone may appear to be friendly and outgoing and caring, but their intentions are more devious. That's the type of thing that I refuse to tolerate in people I surround myself with. So yeah, Lucifer, pretty high up on the list. Great character. Seems like a real stand-up dude when he's able to effectively do that, and we'll see how that sort of evolves in the next season. Next up, we have Charlie's Guardians, Razzle and Dazzle. We're going to put Razzle and Dazzle on the Friends tier. I believe it was Dazzle's the one that died at the end of season 1, so rip Dazzle. But these two are adorable, and I like that they're kind of set up to be these mascots, but we find out that they're actually pretty strong and there to protect Charlie. And they're really more like support as opposed to just pets. I think they sing too. One thing I read is that one of them sings in one of the songs in background, so they can talk. They're not just like the pets, but they're pretty important, and I could definitely be friends with Razzle and Dazzle. Next up, we have Mimsy. Mimsy is a character that came out of nowhere, and I have some thoughts on whether or not she had a ton of value add in, I believe, episode 5. But she is not a boring character by any means, and her connections to Alistair make her pretty significant, I think. But I'm going to put Mimsy on the We Can't Be Friends tier. Initially, I thought she'd be more on the not entirely trustworthy tier, but I've known people like this, where even if you have things in common and you get along well, if these types of people know they can get something from you, or if they need something, they can kind of lean on you to either bail them out or give them something, and that's why they choose to interact with you. It's manipulative, and it's very, very kind of sketch and not trustworthy. And we kind of see that illustrated in the episode where Mimsy gets into trouble with the loan sharks, and she brings an entire conflict to the hotel because she knows Alistair can get her out of it. That's the type of person I don't want to associate with, because they will only show up when they need something, and they only keep you around because they'll know they'll need something in the future, and I don't trust that. More so than just not so trustworthy, actively dangerous, I guess it would be. Actively dangerous type of person. Next up, we have Cherry Bomb. A character, again, I did not expect to have a key role in more than at least one episode, as just part of the characters interacting with the hotel. I thought she'd be kind of like Serpentious, what I originally thought, where she'd show up, she'd be kind of a one-off, and we wouldn't see her again. But we learn that Cherry Bomb is very close to Angel. They're really good friends, and she kind of specifically states, hey, we might be really different, but I am there for you if you need me. And from what I've read, part of her motivation for wanting to gain power and potentially become an overlord is to help out Angel and get him out of his situation, which we don't see in the story, but I've kind of read some analysis of their dynamic. And if that's true, that makes sense, because she seems very protective and willing to stand by Angel as basically his best friend, it looks like. And so she's going on the we're super cool tier. Cherry Bomb is the type of person I feel like if we were friends and I needed her to help me with something, she'd do it in a heartbeat. And that's something I really value in people I interact with. Not because I need them to do something, but if I was ever in a pinch, or if I was ever in trouble, then I could rely on that person to help me out. That's we're putting her up there. I think she's gonna stay at the hotel in season 2. We'll see if I'm right, but I think she's gonna be a reoccurring character in the core cast now that things have sort of changed. So we'll see. Next up, we're going to look at more of Heaven, and this is Sarah, leader of the Seraphim, and she logically is going to go up here on the not entirely trustworthy tier. I thought for a bit in how I would rank her compared to Alistair. I think Alistair's goals in the micro are a lot more potentially dangerous than Sarah's. Her goals in the macro, I think, would be a bit more of a problem. But it's very clear from the way we see her interacting with everyone in Heaven that she knows a lot that she can't let on. I did see a thing that someone had mentioned in a YouTube comment on a video that said, angels can't lie. They're physically incapable of lying, at least based on kind of the biblical definition of angels. She says things like, there's more to the story than I can tell you, or, I did what I needed to because I felt it was right. I don't think she's lying, but the fact that we don't know what she knows and how it's connected to all the things with hell means I think she's very much a person I couldn't trust on a personal level. We'll see how that sort of evolves, because I think we're going to get more of the sort of internal political workings of Heaven in season 2. And we might even find out the full story of how the extermination came to be and how agreements were formed. And I think Sarah is going to be a key player in that. Next up, we've got Emily. Emily is a character I knew nothing about prior to her showing up in the middle of the season, or later part of the season. And a lot of people liken her to kind of the Heaven equivalent of Charlie, which I think is fair. She's very much the optimistic and idealistic thinker and wanting to do what's best and look out for people. And when she finds out about the things Heaven's doing, it shakes a lot of her confidence in the system and causes her to start to question things, which Sarah warns her against. But I like Emily. I think she's the type of person who I feel like I could trust, and doesn't seem like she has any ulterior motives. Some people that you meet in life are pretty transparently open about who they are, and you feel like you know what motivates them a lot of the time. So they're the type of people you wouldn't have a reason to distrust, unlike some of the other folks on the list. And so on a personal level, I think I'd be pretty cool with Emily. I feel like she wouldn't have a reason to stab me in the back because it's not within her personality. And we'll see. We'll see where that goes in the next season. Next up, we have Rosie. Rosie, the Overlord of Cannibal Town, is another character that surprised me a bit. We see her in the initial meeting of the Overlords, and she doesn't really have much of a role. But she becomes pretty important later in episode 7, I think it is, where we find out that not only is she considered a really powerful overlord, but she is surprisingly wholesome and serves as kind of like a mentor figure for Charlie as she's sorting out her feelings, learning that Vaggie was an exterminator, an exorcist angel. And Rosie's level of being able to act as kind of like the psychiatrist and offer really positive and constructive advice. Again, not really something I would have expected based on her role as the cannibal overlord, but she turned out to be one of the most wholesome characters that really was key to helping Charlie sort her feelings and also helping her get the entirety of Cannibal Town on her side to defend against the extermination. And so I think Rosie would be someone that I'd want to be really on good terms with, for one, but also if we were friends, I feel like I could trust her and confide in her to be able to offer, again, valuable advice. And I wouldn't have expected that from any of these characters, but it was a pleasant surprise, and I really like Rosie a lot. I think she's important, and hopefully we'll see more of her in season 2. Next up, we have Lilith. Lilith, we don't really know much about on a character level other than her role as Charlie's mom. She was gone for 7 years, and she split with Lucifer, but we don't really know where she's been until the very end of season 1. And based on how Luke describes a deal that was made, something Lilith did allowed her to stay in heaven and basically just chill up there, which I don't think anybody saw coming. And that's a very interesting plot point. But as far as the personal connection, based on what we've learned about her now, I don't think she can be trusted. I don't think Lilith's goals have a big altruistic motivation. I think she knows what she wants, and she's out to accomplish that no matter who she's got to get through. And we'll see if that's true. I've seen a lot of interesting and really creative theories about, whether or not the Lilith we see in the end of season 1 is even the real Lilith. How does Eve factor into it? A lot of unknowns. But just based on the fact that she's struck a deal with heaven, I don't think Lilith can be trusted. And with that, we have hit the end of the core cast on this tier list for Hazbin Hotel. I'll kind of leave it front and center here so we can see it. I don't think I'm really surprised by my ranking. I guess depending on how things progress, I could foresee some characters moving up to maybe the ride or die tier. This one was kind of reserved for who I would personally feel like I have the most investment in, and that ended up being Angel, not entirely surprising. But on the protect at all costs tier of characters, I think are easy to befriend and want to be engaged with on a social level. It seems to kind of make sense. There were some surprises, like I mentioned, from the start of the series up till the end of season 1, and if I did this tier list based on what I saw in the pilot, for example, of the characters that show up in the pilot that give us enough to go on, this list would be completely different. I probably would have a lot more of them in the friends or not entirely trustworthy tier, and probably very few at the ride or die or protect at all costs tier. But this exercise, I think, is something I'm going to need to revisit when we learn more in the next season. It's going to be a while, but I'm definitely looking forward to whatever else Viv and her team come up with for the universe. I'm considering doing this same type of thing for Hell of a Boss. It's a much bigger cast since it's been going for longer, so I will think about that for the future. But in the meantime, hopefully me talking through and discussing a little bit about the characters and what I think of them was interesting. So with that said, we'll call this a video, and I will see you folks in the next one.